Well, I'm glad to see all of you. It's been quite some time since I've been in this type of classroom. My average classroom has got about 145 bright and ready to go student pharmacists, or if I'm in the med school, they've got about 40 to 50 wanting to be physicians. And then when I go to psychology, I've got about 100 of those folks who are wanting to be clinical psychologists. So I'm kind of glad to be with you guys, to be honest with you. I also need to tell y'all your questions that was sent to me about marijuana were excellent. In fact, it's given me a lot of thought. And what I've tried to do is I'm going to try to answer some of these questions. I am a clinical pharmacist, which means I specialize in certain areas of pharmacy and medicine. My area is called addiction pharmacy, which means I deal with addiction meds and treatments, psychiatric meds and treatments, and chronic pain management. That's what I do. I've been doing it for 25 years as an international consultant, traveled the world, and now as a result of being invited by the University of Georgia about 10 years ago to come teach it because they had a new med school coming and others. I was asked to come and talk about marijuana and the cannabinoids, and your questions are very applicable to what we're going to talk about. So I am a professor of pharmaceutical science. In other words, what I do is I talk about medications, y'all, and basically that's how I'm going to talk about marijuana and the cannabinoids and what it's about. Current legalization has not changed the facts of the complexity of the problems that we have with leaf marijuana as it is used as a medicine. There are two types of dimensions when it comes to marijuana. There's leaf marijuana, which is a very, very short-acting component which has very little medical use. And medical cannabinoids, which comes from the cannabis plant, which is we're trying to get some sort of legislation to change the fact that we can look at the cannabis plant in the U.S. As a result, the pharmaceutical industry then can look at developing new medicines from that. The good news is that if we can appropriately study the cannabis plant, other organic derivatives could be useful, and we're seeing some of those have been discovered in Europe, and it could show us that compounds are helpful. But in my world, before I put any kind of medication, regardless of it being inhalable, it being oral, it being injectable, I've got to know it's safe. My role as a clinical pharmacist and as I train pharmacists and physicians, the reason we have licenses with the states that we will practice in is for your safety. And one of the issues seems to be continually brought up, what and how is marijuana safe in all of its forms? And the answer to that is, we don't know. We simply do not know. There's a lot of information that's on the internet. There's a lot of promotion that's on the internet. There's a lot of information, and a lot of it is not true. A lot of it is not proven. A lot of it is not saying anything. So one of my roles today is to try to help you, because one of the things I try to do is, with any kind of patient, is to make sure that we deal with any medication in order for you not to have adverse drug effects. It's kind of like any of y'all allergic to penicillin? Anybody in here? I'd want to know that, because if they came in and there was a prescription written by their physician for penicillin and they was to take it, they could have an allergic reaction that could actually cause your death. Same thing with marijuana and all its derivatives. The thing about it is, so information has changed drastically since 2013. The old technology of understanding the science of marijuana was looking at primarily one component of marijuana as delta-9 THC. New technologies now of understanding the science of all the cannabinoids, which are extremely important. And when I teach my new bioscience PhDs, which I just had 2, they finish their dissertations this week, they're going to go out into the world, and that's what they're going to do. Is they're going to look at all kinds of biologicals having to do with medication. And what we've discovered is there's some new information of high-dose cannabinoids that people don't know about. And I don't really know about. I don't understand it. So we will hope to talk about this. Most of you know that it comes as a plant. We use the dried parts of it, the shredded leaves, the stems, the seeds, just about all the plant. and it's known by various things. Somebody asked, how long have we been using marijuana as a medicine? 4,000 years, as far as best I can tell historically. It's been used a long time. When did it change? It changed in the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Now, why did it change? We'd been using it for medicine in our history and European history and Asian history, all over the world, been used as medicine. Why did it change here? It's because of politics. The DuPont family, if y'all understand about DuPont, know your history, were very wealthy. And in the 30s, they were coming out of the Depression, they controlled the wood pulping industry. And the wood pulping industry at that time was the reason for the manufacture of paper. And so one of the things that upset them was cannabis, the plant itself, has been used for rope for thousands of years. They found a mechanism that they could make paper out of the cannabis plant. And so when the DuPonts discovered that, they got upset and they put the political wheels in motion, so to speak, and guess what they did? They made marijuana illegal in 1937 as a result of that. Had nothing to do with its psychoactive capabilities. Had something to do with the political use of the plant for the use of it as a paper product. Now, if you look at marijuana and cannabinoids today, this is what you would see. In my world, when I'll go out marijuana, it's much different than most people think. It consists of all types of different things. And I put one out that y'all may be familiar. Y'all familiar with CBD? Y'all remember they talk about the oil, having to use the oil in children that has seizures, and it's actually approved for inside of this state. That is the legal part of marijuana. Now, when we look at CBD, it can also be used as an antibiotic. We also know that it can help inhibit certain types of cancer cells. It can be used to promote bone growth. It can reduce seizures, reduce blood sugar. It can do all of those things, reduce pain, anxiety, slow bacterial growth, suppress muscle spasms, etc., etc., etc. And that's great. But when you give me a bottle of impure oil, and I don't know exactly what the dose is, except I'm going to give you 2 droppers full. I'm not sure exactly how much is involved in that oil. And I give it to a 6-year-old, I'm not sure how long that function of no seizures may lead to the destruction of the liver. Because that's what I do. That's what I'm about. That's what science is about. So if you're going to take something and it's going to create problems for you down the road, it's usually something that is not safe for you medically. But when we talk about cannabinoids in 2016, this is what we're talking about, y'all. This is what the picture looks like. And so we see that. And so you have also the understanding of the cannabinoids and all their uses. So you will have the raw material. This is kind of what most people see as a joint. And the raw material can be used as various things. So you got THCA and CBDA and CBCA and all of those derivatives. Then when it's heated, and this is the issue about smoking a joint, some people want to make it smell. The reason it makes such a strong smell is because you've got certain types of enzymes inside of that plant, and it breaks a very aromatic, a distinctive smell. And so when you heat it, it changes some of the raw materials into these types of chemical compounds, and then guess what? Then some people take the raw materials and they let it age and they let it sit just like they do with whiskey over so many periods of time, and what it does, it concentrates and makes additional types of compounds. So when you talk about the cannabis plant, it has all types of capabilities for new medications, all types. So this is what I deal with. This is the world that I deal with. And so, but what y'all probably are more familiar with is THC, Delta-9 THC. Everybody knows about it. Y'all may know about it more than I do, except that it's a very complicated molecule. It's a very large molecule, and it's something that people have been curious about for a long time. Now, when you smoke the plant, and this is another problem, some people say, well, what about smoking? Is it more harmful than tobacco? The answer to that is yes. The reason that it's more harmful than tobacco is because you can see all the compounds and the different, if y'all go into organic, had any of y'all had organic chemistry? Any of y'all done that yet? All right, you will if you go to school, at college. What you will see is, you will see all of the cannabinoids, which they estimate 66, but the thing about it is, the things that we go down to is the hydrocarbons and the simple alcohols and the aldehydes and the ketones and the acid, and all of those have chemical structures that when they're heated, they change, and when they are heated and change, they can create good effects as well as negative effects. It's like the penicillin. The reason they're allergic to penicillin is because they have a gene code that metabolizes penicillin a little differently than most of us. And instead of it going on the good side to where it would kill the infection, it goes on the allergic side and creates a histamine release. And guess what? They have a very painful and almost life-threatening experience with penicillin. And a lot of people have it. So the thing about it is, what we want to do, if we're going to try to make it medical, we want to separate out these compounds to make only one chemical compound. It's kind of like the law of pharmaceutical science, but that's the example of some of the things. Y'all ask about the effects on the brain. What is marijuana and what does it do? And most of it is as a result of smoking. It's an inhalation. So if I look at the 2005 material, if I was to give this class 2005, and Timothy O'Leary, it's amazing to me. Timothy O'Leary was a pro-marijuana advocate back in the early 70s, and his materials are still being quoted by people, which I think is almost as ridiculous. Evidently, they don't understand the science, but the thing about it is, when Timothy O'Leary was smoking weed, the concentrations ranked 3 to 5%. Is that good or bad? Well, we wasn't real sure because we never studied the 3 or 5%. Do you understand? We've never studied it as a medicine because 1937 made it illegal. The federal government says it has no medical use, and so we can't study it in pharmaceutical worlds because of those issues. Also, back in 2005, the average of students using leaf marijuana was around 42%, according to the surveys that I looked at. It was legalized in 2 states. California had a decriminalization law, and Washington, D.C. was thinking about decriminalization law, and there were no deaths. You know, people want to know why there was no deaths. In 2005, no deaths. And that's an advocate for people to use it. It doesn't create harm because it doesn't kill people. Well, okay. 2016, though, is much different. Now we have pharmaceutical grades. We have concentrations between 15 to 80%. Now, I've been to Colorado 3 times. I've went into the personal formularies and the use formularies, and if you go in there and you see the stickers on them, and you'll see anywhere from 15 to 40 to 50, and it will tell you, break it down. I'll show you a picture in a minute of how they break it down and tell you about that. Students using leaf marijuana, it's estimated about 63% folks smoke marijuana. It's legalized in 24 states in some capacity. Some people do not allow the cultivation. Georgia allows only the oil. Most of the states allow the CBD oil. But according to Colorado, and this was in 2014 because they have legalized personal as well as medical use, 25% of all fatal accidents involve marijuana. The thing about it is, I was out there training the DREs, the drug recognition experts that work for the State Patrol, to try to determine what levels, because some of you had asked what levels are considered create impairment. 0.01% is what most people say, but we're not real sure. I'll be honest with you, we don't know. So that's what the problem I will tell you, though, is when you add marijuana to alcohol, it enhances the impairment of alcohol. It doesn't diminish the impairment of marijuana. It impairs alcohol. So you put those two together, you end up with some pretty serious situations. Now, THC affects all parts of the central nervous system, including the brain, because that's fat cells. It's fat soluble, highly fat soluble, so it does that. And so you see that concentrate your thinking, brain, and your midbrain, and your coordination. A lot of people are not as coordinated when they're smoking pot. That's why a lot of people don't. In fact, you can't run very well if you're stoned. When I train state troopers down in Forsyth, they want to know what's the best drug to have for us to obtain an arrest. And I said they need to be stoned because they freeze your heel to toe reflex. And instead of, running like this, you slide like this because you can't move. And you go faster than that, as some of y'all are much more limber than I am because you're younger, you'll fall over in about 50 feet versus somebody on methamphetamine or alcohol. They have coordination capabilities. But this is also a problem with the driving. This is also another problem with the driving, is because of that. So we see that. Now, what I will tell people is that marijuana is a subtle process. Researchers call it a passive destroyer. And I'll show you the reason for that in a minute. But it's because it's highly lipid soluble, and it affects the central nervous system, including your brain, your spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system. And you have certain sites. See, if y'all want to come to the University of Georgia and you want to get a PhD, you're going to have a very good basal ganglia. You're going to have something that organizes your world to the utmost. You're going to have to be time managed to the utmost. You're going to have to be able to juggle this and that and the other in order to get all the things that are required done. And the thing about it is, what happens is that cannabinol, the THC, simply slows that secretary down. Then you've got to have the hippocampus. Now the hippocampus is important because it's responsible for instinctual fight or flight. In other words, if you're in a dangerous situation, you need to have all the capability of being able to survive that situation. But what happens when people are stoned, they seem to not respond to those cues. So if there's a fire or an emergency or somebody falls down, do they need help? They'll sit down and they'll look, and it's like they slow motion. It's slow motion. And of course the cerebellum is the coordination area, which I've already mentioned. So there are lots of cannabinol receptors, and they're concentrated in different places, and this is where we talk about the generic 66 to 70 cannabinols in leaf marijuana. It affects short-term memory. Now, short-term memory is important because when you're learning new things, you have to encode. You have to encode. You have to encode. And if you play that encodement, and then you have to have a practice rehearsal in order for it to go in long-term memory, because if it gives you a piece of information having to do with a test that you're going to take and you don't recall that information on the test, guess what? All of that short-term memory. Most of the things that y'all learn in a class such as this is based on your short-term memory capabilities. Coordination, we talked about. Learning. Y'all are all very curious. It's obvious to me by your questions, and I'm very grateful that you are. Curiosity it's why I'm still doing what I'm doing at my age. I love finding out new things, and I like learning new things, and that keeps you fresh. You understand? Marijuana affects that. What I find look, y'all, I've treated marijuana addicts for 30 years, and what I find about them is they get a rote system going, and they do the same thing over. It's like a little mice on a treadmill, over and over and over and over again. You can't teach them a lot of new things. Oh, if they learn it under the influence, that's fine, but if they ever clear up and not smoke anything, then they can't recall it, so that's not really new learning. Dependent state learning, we call it. Problem solving. Oh my God. If I was to give y'all a 100-piece puzzle, each one of y'all, and I was to give you a time, and there's been studies that show this, that if you are not under the influence of marijuana, you can probably solve it within less than 7 minutes. Under the influence of marijuana, guess what? It takes 40 minutes or longer. Some people can't even do it, because problem solving it kind of freezes. So the thing about, now the chemical y'all ask about that's involved with these is called a anandamide. Now the reason people like marijuana, it stimulates anandamide, and what anandamide is, it's the bliss molecule. Woo! Yay! Woo! Yay! Woo! Yay! But bliss is very short acting, y'all. It's something that we normally have. It's kind of like I'll be happy when I leave here today and I have the afternoon off. I can do what I want to. Wife's not in town. Golf clubs are close by. Nice day. I might go, hit a few balls. I don't have to work in the yard. I don't have to take the trash out. Bliss. That's anatomized. I'll make a good grade on a test. Yay. You understand? And that's what THC, Delta 9 THC mimics. So you have to be aware. So if you impair short-term learning and coordination and learning and problem solving, guess what? The capabilities as a good student begin to diminish. And y'all, let me tell you something. And some of y'all asked me about pharmacy school. You want to go to the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy? Y'all be interested in that? They'll start out, my graduating class graduates in less than 10 days. All of them got new jobs, and they're going to start at about $145,000 a year. That's for 36 hours a work week. So most of them can work 3 days and make 140 plus. What's it take to get there? Well, let's see here. You're going to have a GPA about, the last class we had about 3.92. Your PCAT score is going to have to be in the 95 percentile range. And it's highly competitive because we're a public university. That means we're least expensive university on the East Coast. We'll have 1,700 applications. We'll take the top 200 and we'll interview those and we'll select 140 out of that. Guess what? You're going to have that capability. Now that's one of the benefits of not using marijuana in situations that you're in currently. That's if you want a bright future. I don't know. I don't make those choices for you, but that's the thing. What about athletes? I've got to go over to the Athletic Association next week. Just left them last week. And we got some fellows over there that like marijuana. And they'll smoke them a little marijuana, and they've worked real hard, and they've got them a scholarship, and they come into the SEC for the first time, and they all pumped up because the University of Georgia's got a great reputation. They want to go to the NFL. That's what they want to. That's what they're telling me. Guess what, y'all? What happens when you smoke marijuana? The first thing that happens, you increase your heart rate. When you increase your heart rate, you decrease the body's maximum capability for conditioning. And to be a great athlete, you've got to have great conditioning. You also reduce the size of the lungs capability for what we call VO2. And when you gross VO2, guess what happens? You don't breathe as much, you don't get as much oxygen, you can't function as well. So guess what? You fatigue about the second quarter. You may go into the third quarter a little energy. By the time you get to the fourth quarter, guess what? I was a performance expert for the National League, Braves, and Cardinals for 10 years. And what we find is these folks don't perform well because of what's happening. Your reflection, your reflex times, memory recall. You got to learn plays. Remember that? You got to learn plays. You got all this learning that you got to do in professional, in any kind of sports activity. And guess what happens to people? They forget, and they don't remember. So you also have impairment, and what most people don't understand is, well, it's a short-acting deal, but how long does it last in the system? Well, depending on how much you smoke, it only lasts about 10 hours. So you have that impairment, but in the central nervous system, it can last up to 7 to 10 days. So that slowness that you have has to do with that. So that's your athlete. This is what I talked about beer. If you got one beer and you smoke one joint, you got 3 beers. So the impairment level is pretty significant. And then the thing about it is, if you got one joint and you drink a beer, you can add the synergistic effects of your marijuana too. So that's why people drink and smoke at the same time, because they think. But the thing about it is, the impairment issues out here on the road are in what you're doing. It's not just what you're thinking, it's how you're performing out here driving. So it's not something that you want. The other thing that most people don't know is that marijuana affects what we call high relative glucose metabolism. Now, what does that mean? It's kind of like some of y'all drowsy right now. The reason y'all drowsy is that because your glucose metabolism is shut down and you're sleepy. And that's because you may have got up early, you may have got tired, you may have eaten high sugar at lunch, I don't know. But guess what happens? When you shut that glucose down, the brain shuts down and you don't learn anything. You miss out on a lot of different things. So this is why everybody's going low carbohydrates and that healthier foods and all the things that y'all are seeing. And fortunately, your mamas are probably teaching y'all this. But the thing about it is, marijuana does it regardless. It'll shut down the glucose metabolism, so your capabilities are limited. Your capabilities are limited. And it also does it in the frontal and the temporal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe is your thinking lobe, your judgment lobe. Your temporal lobe is your memory lobe. So you learn something, and you say, I've learned this rule, and there's a consequence if I violate this rule. So guess what? Some people don't learn the rule, and they don't learn from the consequences of the rule. So guess what happens? They circle around and around and around again and again and again. We see it many, many times. Marijuana also makes people stupid. If you smoke enough of it long enough, you'll stay stupid. If you look at the neuropsychological testing, IQ can drop as much as 10 points. I don't know about y'all, I can't afford 10 points. You are going into your peak season to want to get a higher education of various sorts. If it be technical school, if it be going to the military, going into a college or university, whatever it may be, you've got to have peak capabilities. But what happens, and this is what's so sad to me, is I see some of the best capable people impacted by this. And once you cross the bridge, y'all, I need to tell you this. Once you cross that bridge, I can't change it. I don't have anything to make it come back. I don't. I wish I did. Science, and that's why I keep looking at it, so science does it. If we look at biologicals, we do know that 70% risk of testicular cancer with the current marijuana that's on the market. There's a risk particularly elevated for, at least if you use it weekly. You begin the use in adolescence. And so what you're seeing is approximately 1 in 36,000 or 7,500 people in the U.S. a year. The rate is increasing 3 to 6% for the past year, for the past 50 years. Every year we see an increase in testicular cancer as a result of marijuana use, as a result of higher concentrations in the drug and people increasing the dose. Remember, I'm a pharmacist. Two things I look at: what the dose of the medication is and how often you're going to take it. What most people don't know is they don't even know the dose of their marijuana. Oh, it's some good stuff, man. I really like it. But they don't have a clue. But the thing about it is, what you will see is that it creates some long-term consequences. Is it toxic? People ask me that all the time. Study from American scientists on relative toxicity, drugs showed that using 10 times of the effective dose of alcohol can be fatal, whereas more than 1,000 times of the effective dose of marijuana would have to be used to be possibly fatal. In other words, a toxic dose of THC is 65 kilograms with 8.45. In other words, you'd have to consume 17 pounds of THC to kill yourself. Yay, right? I know that makes y'all happy, doesn't it? Well, that ain't the good news. The thing that I find that's really surprising, and we interviewed and evaluated 100 users of THC in Colorado. Tachycardia is almost invariably produced in acute intoxication combined with sensory alteration, and an increased tremor were reported, contribute to the effective components of these reactions. CNS and respiratory depression are also noted in high doses, which in severe overdose can be life-threatening. The danger of pre-existing cardiac irregularities, which some people don't know they have, are worsened as a result. The risk of experiencing serious toxic effects of cannabis is limited by the adverse psychotropic effects of the high dose, which usually leads to cessation of use before the onset of a dangerous physical consequence. What I'm trying to tell you is, it is a passive destroyer. Most of you don't know you have an irregular heartbeat. Some of you may know that, but yet I have people who know that and take it, and guess what? It worsens their condition. So that's up to you. It's not up to me. But is it toxic? Every one that I reviewed, and we did histories and physicals on these 100 people, guess what? All of them had high blood pressure. Now I'm talking about they were from 20 to 35 years old. Every one of them had extremely high blood pressure. I don't know what the reason for it is. It may be having something to do with the CNS. But the problem is, y'all, I had to send 2 of them to the emergency room because they're at stroke levels. They were doing like 240 over 180. I'm talking about, and this is because they were using high concentrated I think one was dabbing and one was using high concentrated marijuana smoke as well as edibles. So the thing about it is it accumulates.
How often were they dabbing if their blood pressure was that high?
Well, they said they were dabbing every other day. Yeah. But see, what most people don't know, they start out with occasional use. What y'all don't understand is people start out with occasional use, and we'll talk about tolerance. It builds tolerance, and then they increase the dose. What most people don't know now is what exactly is the dose as we see it. Is it addicting? Oh, this is a great question. This is a great question. All right, here's the impact. Teen heavy marijuana smokers, 4 times more likely to develop depression within a year. 15 greater risk of developing a panic attacks as adults. Anxiety levels were no higher than others to begin with. And the problem that we have is we don't understand the dimensions of why people have so much anxiety when they stop smoking marijuana on a regular basis. Now, I'm in a treatment facility. These people identified as being addicted and being diagnosed as being addicted. And they have this severe anxiety about 3 weeks after they stop smoking, to the point that some have panic disorder, which has never been a part of their world, to be honest with you. We don't know why that is. It's just something we see. Now, when we look at the brain, and this is Dan Ammons out in California. Yes, sir.
For the panic attacks, it said that was like for respiratory problems. Would that also be with like just smoking anything?
You have twice as much problem with marijuana smoke as you do with tobacco smoke. The problem that you have is it's a heavier smoke. It's much heavier because it has more, and it's got more hydrocarbons in it than tobacco smoke. Huh? You don't need to hold it in to get high. Most people, that's a fallacy. You don't need to hold it to get high. You can smoke it just like you can. Most people don't know that, but yeah, they hold it in and it creates that. So the problem is, it's a problem as a result of being a heavier smoke. It's a physical thing, y'all. It's just science. But this is what happens to this brain. You see the 16-year-old, this is a 2-year history of daily use, and he's lost about 20% of his physical capability versus the normal brain. And Dan Ammons, again, Dr. Dan Ammons, he's got a clinic out in California, and he scans their brains. People coming in his facility, they'll scan the brains. And they said, well, I'm only smoking marijuana. Well, sure. He looks at the brain then and looks at it. Well, why aren't you performing better at school? Why don't you have a job? Why aren't you doing the things you need to do? Oh, it's harmless. And let me tell y'all something. It is not harmless. There's nothing on the face of this earth that's made organically, inorganically, that if you take long enough is harmless. Because and that's one of the adverse drug effects. But the problem is his brain is coated with oil. Now that physical, psychiatric, and the psychoactive capabilities of it is long gone, but the oil stays. And I'll show you that in a second. And it accumulates. So you can smoke a joint, you can eat a brownie, you can drink a drink. I mean, out there in Colorado, they got all these different preparations that you can use. So let's talk about pharmacology. That's what I do. That's what I teach. So if we look at the difference, we have the delta-9 THC that we've mentioned, and we got CBD, which if it's scientifically changed, it can be non-psychoactive, okay? So what is marijuana? Well, some say it's an excitatory, has excitatory capabilities. Some say it's sedative. Some people smoke it because it causes sedation. It produces a mild analgesic effect. In other words, it's a pain reliever. It also, in high doses, and this is the problem that we've got currently, it creates hallucinations or psychosis. That's the problem that we got currently, is people are showing psychotic symptoms just by using certain types of cannabis products. And it's something that we cannot manage either. It's not something I can give an antipsychotic medication for and they will stabilize. They don't stabilize. It has to get out of their system before those symptoms disappear. Now, we got to talk about the CB1 and CB2 because those are the receptors. And when we look at the receptors, you see the blue ones? See them? See all the blue ones? They're all over your body. Millions of them. Millions of them. And they have to do with all types of activities, and the CB2, which is the green ones, are very limited, mainly to the immune system. One of the problems that we got with long-term use of cannabis is the immune system shuts down and is diminished. So they catch all kinds of viruses, bacterial infections that the body can't affect. It affects IgA and IgB and IgE and all those kind of immune chemicals over long-term use. Now, CB1s are kindly located in the central nervous system. They're the ones that create all of those effects that I've mentioned to you before. Now, CB exerts its effects by driving this innate system and mimicking its natural. So this bliss, woo, woo, you know, the bliss will last 5 minutes. And then you have all these adverse effects. Now, they don't seem like much, but the thing about it is, as you diminish anandamide, you also diminish GABA, which is another neurochemical, and GABA in the system is responsible for tranquilization. You diminish GABA, then guess what? You start having a little hand tremor, and then you start feeling anxious, and then the thing about it is, it all has to do with that CB1. Now, as a result, we call the CB1 an omni-neuromodulator. In other words, it controls multiple functions by one receptor, which is remarkable. Now, the thing I like about it is in medicine, if I could find more of these, then that's what we'd want to use. But the thing about it is we're not able to study it, so that's the problem. So the reason that we use cannabis medically has to do that we use it as something that controls nausea and vomiting. So when I do use a leaf marijuana, I usually use it with hospice patients who have terminal illnesses that have some sort of medication they're trying to take, but they can't take it because they're so nauseated, usually chemotherapy, cancer patients. So we have to give them this in order to settle the stomach, in order for them to use the medication. That's why we use it medically, because it's short-acting. And then the control of appetite and neuropathic pain. Now that's what they want to, that's one of the prescribed uses in Colorado for this leaf marijuana is neuropathic pain. Now, neuropathic pain is a chronic pain. So let's think about it. All right, chronic pain means that you have pain all the time. Okay? So what I try to treat it with, if we use leaf marijuana, I can give a person leaf marijuana and I can control that pain for up to 2 hours. And then what are they going to have to do? They got chronic pain, it's there all the time, you got control of it 2 hours, what are they going to have to do? They're smoking joints. Huh? Got to smoke another one, baby. Light that bad boy up, you know. And how many joints are they going to have in a 24-hour-a-day period if it's every 2 hours? 12. And how many are they going to have in a week? So here's the math. Say a lot. You understand what I'm saying? It's too short-acting, y'all. So I've got a pill that's currently on the market. It's called Merrill. It's a 10 milligram. They've actually increased it to 20 milligram. It lasts 8 to 10 hours. And so I can give that person a pill, 8 to 10 hours. How many a day will they have to take? How many in a week? 14. You understand? Because they have better control. And also, if there's an adverse drug effect to it, guess what? I can figure that out because I know which dose. I can calculate the dose that they're going to have per hour. Because that's what we do as clinical pharmacists. You can take a dose of a medication, and I can calculate how much medication you're going to have in your system within the hour, within 2 hours, within 4 hours, within 10 hours. You understand? But this is why we have this. All right, so here's your medical cannabis. This is what it looks like in Colorado. So what you have is, you have a picture of it, and this is White Widow. This is the hybrid, White Widow. Oh, it's very medical, very medical. And it's primary THC, and so they want to calculate the active cannabinoids, and so you have CBD 0.49, less than 1%. You have CBN, there's no calculation for it. That's another non-psychoactive compound they use. And look at here, THC, 15.33%. And then you look at CBD 0.2, and so you see the breakout here, see it breaks out, and then actually on the label down here, it will give you a genetic code. because everything has to be regulated by the DNA of each plant. That's how they regulate it. Pretty sophisticated. But it tells me that's a 15.33%, and they'll give you a little baggie of it. Now, if you're in Colorado, you can buy an ounce. That's the personal use for about $400. In the medical world, in the medical side, if you got a medical card, you can buy 3 ounces, and it'll cost you $500. Same stuff. Don't tell me why. So what we're running into is a lot of people, even though it's legal, it's so expensive, guess what? They're buying it off the black market because it's less expensive. You understand? But that's what it looks like, y'all. That's what it looks like. So if we look at the cycle of life, and I'm going to stop here in a minute and take y'all's question because I think your questions are good. We look at slow absorption. So orally, this is one of the slowest ways to absorb something. Mucous membranes is through the mouth, sublingual. And then topically is through the skin. And of course, we got suppositories and patches. So, when I look at medications, I've got to look at all the routes of administration. There are about 17 different routes of administration, by the way. Yes, ma'am?
You said if it was like orally is the slowest way to absorb something, right?
Through the mucus not underneath the tongue. Sublingual is the second fastest. I hadn't said that yet.
And why do so many people get so messed up on edibles?
I'm going to cover edibles in a minute. Can you wait a second?
Yeah.
All right. Let me. Very good question. All right. So we got this, and so here's the edibles. Look at here. Here's edibles. See, great question. See, I paid her that. For that. All right. So here's the edibles, and see they come in a little baggie. You see goodies, and they got all kinds of brownies and cookies, and they got drinks, and they got a wall full of stuff. And guess what? They come in gelatin capsules, glyco chocolates, sesame seed oil to improve the bioavailability. And the variations peak and the rates of absorption change. But the thing I'm going to tell you is if you happen to take a 10 to 20% concentration in a sesame seed oil, men, if they ingest the 20 milligram, and women, if they ingest, you will have a peak plasma within 4 to 6 hours because the sesame seed oil prevents the absorption rapidly. So when you take an edible, you lose some of it in the stomach, but also because of the way it's made, it's a slow absorbing. So you got somebody going to smoke them a joint, eat them a brownie, suck on a lollipop, drink them a drink, and what it does, it accumulates, y'all, and as you will see it in a minute, that becomes toxic because they don't have enough time to get rid of it because the bioavailability is the same. So, faster absorption is injectable, which is not injectable. Yes, they do. I will take that back. In Europe, they have an injectable. They do. But we don't use it here. And so you have all these different types of injectable sites, intramuscularly, intravenously. Inhale, and of course that's, as y'all know, that's a smokable version. And so when you look at all the absorptions and all the peaks, depending on what you do and how you study it, you will see the various techniques. THC followed for 7 days after smoking a single cannabis cigarette contained 1.5% or 3.55% THC. Guess what? Within the first puff, the concentration inside of the blood ranked 7 to 8 nanograms per mil. One puff, that quick. Impairment, they'll be ranked at 0.25 nanograms per mil. Impairment. So, you can't believe this. Take one puff off of one marijuana cigarette, and you get stopped down the road 10 minutes later, guess what? You would show impairment. That's the issue. Most people don't know this because they don't study the science. They just want to study, I'm so good, it feels so good, it feels so good. Let me tell y'all what a legal record will do for y'all. If you have a marijuana, you're talking about, if going back to pharmacy school, you have a marijuana misdemeanor conviction, you will not be accepted into the University of Georgia School of Pharmacy or School of Medicine or School of Psychology. FYI. No dice. We figure, not a chance. Y'all hear me? Let me tell you something about when you get in the legal system, that legal record now follows you forever. It is a serious situation. And as long as the federal government is sitting over here watching the states very carefully, and I'm not a politician in this, as they're watching this, the states are going to pursue legal action for the smallest amounts. I mean, y'all ask some great questions, and I'm going to get to them in just a second about this. But what I'm trying to tell y'all is these peaks don't take much to get you in trouble. That's all I'm telling you. Vaping. All right, here's the vaping. Vaporizer reported the onset of pure THC, vaporization in higher plasma concentrations compared to smoked marijuana 30 to 60 minutes. And what you will see is vaporization and vaping can concentrate smoke from any type of marijuana. And the reason that we use vaporization, y'all, because it's a type of concentration that we use in pharmacy, can increase it anywhere from 5 to 20 times, depending on the type of vaporization you use. So you smoke a cigarette in a small amount, you vape it, it's going to be a higher amount. Guess what? More concentration in the blood. To dab or not to dab? That is the question. There ought to be a whole play about this. Lord, y'all. Concentration of dab vary from 15 up to 80%. Colorado, they have them all out in the nice little case. They will show you all the different types of dabbing. They show the concentrations of the dabbing. The problem that we're having is psychosis is increasing because people will dab, they'll put it on there, then they'll do an edible, and then they'll do a drink, and it accumulates, and then the next thing you know, they're in the ER with psychosis. And the thing about it is, it's just really, I don't know. I really do not know what a 40% THC concentration will do to your brain. I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
No, it's funny actually because on this thing I read this morning, it was these people were talking about their first experience dabbing, and it wasn't on a stoner website, just to clarify to everybody, but it was just like a general story. And this one girl said, and she's been smoking marijuana since she was like 18, and she's in her 30s, and she said, when I started dabbing, we just did like a tiny little drop on the end of a paper clip, and now I see people getting like huge globs of it, and I'm like, that'll mess you up.
Well, it's we live in a chemical culture, y'all. I mean, I came up through the 70s. I came up when hallucinogens were big, when marijuana was huge, all kinds of other things. And it's unfortunate that we have a culture that seems to drive itself to insanity. The reason I'm a scientist and try to do this as a medication is because dabbing, it's a very high concentration, and people come in and they use that blasting, and they do it all different ways to get a higher concentration. And to me, it makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. And I keep working on that and keep wanting to know, but you can get concentrations up to 80% as a result of some of these dabbing. And I'm not here to defend it. I'm just kind of neutral in the part of the problem is the reason I spend my afternoon with y'all is maybe some of you will hear me, because I want some of y'all to come to college pharmacy and be great clinical pharmacists, or go on to med school, or do whatever you want to do. And I want you to have your minds together. And y'all, this world right now, if you don't have it together, then they're going to throw you to the side, just like they're doing in Colorado. They're throwing them to the side, and people out don't have homes. They don't have places to go. The homeless rate is exploding, and it's all having to do with this stuff. So you have a choice. I mean, y'all have a choice. Like every young person that I know, you have a choice. And again, you got these new concentrations. You got keef, water hash, CO2 oil, butane, BHO, rosin, all of these things, and I'm just going to go over these quickly, and then I'm going to quit. Keef runs 20 to 60%. See, Sesame used to be the hybrid marijuana, and it'd run about 15 to 18%. It was a Cadillac. This is 20 to 60%. Water hash runs 50 to 80%. CO2 oil runs 50 to 75%. BHO oil runs 60 to 90%. And then you have the new one, rosin, runs 50 to 70%. All of these are at concentrations that science has no answer for yet. I know if I've got problems at 3 to 5%, just like morphine, let's take morphine and let's compare apples to an orange. I could give all of y'all 10 milligrams of morphine. Now there's going to be 3 reactions. About 20% of y'all are going to have an allergic reaction to it. I'm going to have to give you some epinephrine and Benadryl in order to overcome that. Some of you are going to be extremely nauseated and sick, and I'm going to have to give you something for that for you to keep it down. And then the problem is sedation. The rest of you be sedated. 10 milligrams. Now what if I was to give you, and this is what we get, and this is not about marijuana, then what if we gave you 100 milligrams of morphine? 90% of you would be dead. That's why we got the terrible opioid epidemic right now. We'll lose, in this state, we'll lose 1,800 young people. I just finished a study out of North Fulton County, talking to 200 families having to do with their death of their loved one, average age 23. And what am I going to do with this? I don't know what this is going to do to you. You go off into a psychotic world and you may not come back. I don't know. I can't tell you. But the thing about it is, y'all, you're at a world where this THC concentration levels are much, much, much too high to be playing around with. And so we got absorption and smoking and inhalation. So let's talk about driving a minute. Some of y'all ask about driving. What does it do about driving? And these are DREs. Well, the problem with driving a marijuana is, one, the good news is it slows you down. Y'all are not doing 150 miles an hour. Y'all doing about 40 miles an hour. The problem comes in when there's multiple tasking. In other words, when you get into traffic and you have what we call divided attention. In other words, you're paying attention to the rear, you're paying attention to the side, and you're paying attention to the front of the vehicle. Guess what happens? You're not able to track that. And so you have a problem with that. Vigilance. How long can you stay with? Y'all know this. You got a big 18-wheeler like I had coming up here, got real close to my tail. And so I decided, well, instead of having this guy on my tail and worrying about, he's got, 40,000 pounds versus my 3,000 pounds, I'll just pull over and let him go on by, which I did. But he followed me for several miles, trying to find out whether or not it's safe or not. Tracking decisions. How are you going to track the vision of what's going on around you driving this vehicle? Or a motorcycle. A lot of people on the motorcycles also have that issue of or biking, just anything. Increased reaction times. Believe it or not, you have increased reaction times, which means what? Stop quicker, which also can lead to some issues. Perception impairment. In other words, your depth perception is impaired. Even though you got quicker reaction time, you don't see that wall is at that distance. It may look like it's further away. Impaired time and distance. Again, y'all, even though you got reaction times and you can hit the brake pretty quick, guess what? Thinking about hitting the brake is delayed. So guess what you'll do? The car's up here, the car's back here, you're going to run into the back of it. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That was perfect. He's telling me to be quiet. Yeah, y'all.